As we've been reporting, rebel forces have retaken control of the city of Aleppo and dozens of towns in the country's northwest. Russia has sent military jets to conduct strikes to back President Bashar al-Assad's regime, while Iran has pledged to support the Syrian government. Well, Greg Barton is Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University, and he joins me now. Greg, good to have you on the program. Look, my understanding is that this is a coalition of rebel forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. What do we know about this group, Greg?
Well, Girish, they've been around for a long time. Their founder has been around for a long time, Muhammad al-Jalani. He founded what became Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Nusra Front, in 2012. That was a project by al-Qaeda in Iraq, or Islamic State in Iraq as it became known, to expand into Syria, to take advantage of the 2011 uprising, the Arab Spring uprising in Syria. And for a long time, he worked in partnership with Mossab al-Zarqawi, the leader of Islamic State in Iraq. But they broke because of differences about loyalty to al-Qaeda. So the Nusra Front was an al-Qaeda group. It broke with al-Qaeda itself in 2017. It said, I mean, at the time we thought it was just symbolic and sort of marketing, frankly, but it said it wanted to become more moderate to better represent the Syrian people. There are signs that that's the case. I mean, it's certainly a jihadi group. It was caught in a terrible conflict in Aleppo, the second largest city of Syria that we're talking about at the moment. 8 years ago, the Assad regime was able to retake Aleppo with support of air support from the Russian Air Force flying out of an airbase in Syria. And then 4 years ago, the conflict essentially went frozen with Aleppo under Assad's control. And suddenly that frozen conflict is unfrozen. Where it goes now, no one really knows, including probably the fighters themselves.
Yes, given what you just said, that this group was sort of broken off from different other jihadi groups, how was it able to regroup and how was it able to so swiftly take over Aleppo?
Well, I think the key thing, Girish, is that it never went away. I mean, the conflict was frozen, but the group was not frozen. It ruled parts of the countryside outside Aleppo in Idlib. It ran a quasi-state. You know, think of Islamic State or think of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Those are sort of similar models, although arguably its rule was not as extreme. So when it sensed a moment of weakness, specifically when it thought that Assad was not able to respond quickly to an assault on Aleppo, it knew that Russian air support would be critical, but Russia, of course, is preoccupied with Ukraine. And the critical thing to understand is that Assad, apart from relying on Russia's help to his regime to survive, has really been saved by Hezbollah. And we know the story of Hezbollah in recent weeks, that it's a shadow of its former self. So Hezbollah is not able to step in and support the Assad regime. So the HTS rebels saw a moment of weakness. They moved, probably not knowing how far they would go or what they would achieve, but they very quickly found that they were pushing on an open door. The people of Syria are really fed up with the Assad regime and didn't want to fight for the Assad regime for Aleppo. And so for the time being, they've retaken Aleppo. They will probably hold it indefinitely. It's hard to see the Assad regime coming back to control the city. But whether this group can push further south down towards Damascus and critically cut off that coastal strip, which is the most important part of Syria, to Assad. That's the big question at the moment.
Do you think that this, I suppose, takeover of Aleppo might embolden them to do that, as you say, move further south, or perhaps even take town after town in the south and east and go beyond that? And given what you've also said about that its allies like Hezbollah have other distractions quite clearly.
Yeah, very often, Girish, these things are a game of momentum, just like a team sport on the field. When the momentum gets your way, you can surge forward. And I think they're trying to surge as far as they can and as quickly as they can. If they can move down the highway, they've already taken a large part of that north-south highway towards Damascus. I don't know at this stage whether they think they could take Damascus, but they could certainly cut Damascus off from the north and from the coast. The Russians have an important seaport in Tartus on the Mediterranean coast. That would be a big blow for them. Behind all of this is the power of Turkey. Turkey has covertly sponsored these groups. It hasn't said a lot about what's happening at the moment, but Turkey is fed up with Assad. Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan is fed up with Bashar al-Assad. It's also fed up with Iran and with Russia. So I think the government of Erdogan is feeling this is a time when Turkey can re-establish itself. Think back to the Ottoman Empire as a major force in the region, and if not directly control, at least be the major player. And that may well be possible.
And what do you make of the timing of this particular offensive, particularly by the rebels?
I think it comes clearly in the wake of the collapse of Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is not able to surge to the support of the Assad forces. Russia's preoccupied. Reportedly, Bashar al-Assad was actually in Moscow and delayed his return. We think he's now back in Damascus. But the sense of weakness, behind that weakness of Hezbollah, of course, is a real sense of weakness and a change of heart for Iran. So the regime in Tehran doesn't want to get drawn into war, doesn't want to expend any more capital and confrontation. Critically, Saudi Arabia has been saying for some time and demonstrating that it wants peace with Iran. It's been a long rival of Iran, doesn't trust Iran, but it would like to have a lasting peace that's more productive for everyone. So that's a critical conjunction of things that make it possible for this group to restart the frozen conflict, so long as they continue to have support from Turkey and so long as Russia doesn't put serious forces into air assaults. But even air assaults, frankly, can't really destroy them.
And of course, all this, Greg, reminds us that the Syrian war never ended. He's just talked about that. But can you tell us then, what do you make of President al-Assad's grip on power in Syria?
Well, he's gripping onto a rump state of his former state. He made a decision to let go of large parts of Syria in the northeast are controlled by the Kurds. The Kurds, Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish forces, defeated Islamic State. Still have, by the way, large Islamic State groups out there in the eastern desert ready to come back if given a chance. The Turks don't like the Syrian Democratic Forces. They have an issue with the Kurds. And so if their actions in all of this weaken the SDF, then Islamic State could step into that space. But Assad basically was hanging onto a brittle regime, only able to maintain power because of support from Russia and Iran via Hezbollah. That certainly has changed now. How much of his state he can hang on to, whether it becomes a smaller rump around Damascus, or whether indeed it leads to uprisings in Damascus that see him toppled, we don't know. But if, and obviously one day his regime will collapse, when it collapses, it'll collapse, we think, in a way, just like what we're seeing at the moment. So this may be the beginning of that.
And given, so many stakeholders here, we're talking about Hezbollah, Russia, Turkey, of course, the US backs the Kurdish forces as well. Is Syria once again becoming like an epicenter of a multi-proxy conflict?
Yeah, I think it certainly is, Girish, and one of the reasons we don't talk about it as much is wishful thinking. Just as wishful thinking led us astray in Afghanistan and Iraq, so in Syria, Islamic State has been much more active than we'd like to acknowledge. We talk about Australians, women and children who are still in camps in northeastern Syria under SDF control, thinking that we can push the problem of repatriating them down the road. But the reality is those camps are ticking time bombs. If the regime, the forces change with respect to the SDF in the northern third of Syria, then Islamic State could step into that vacuum. I'm not saying it could come back to power entirely, but it's not an undone force. So there's a lot of play, and we've taken our eyes off the region because we've been looking at things like Ukraine, looking at what's happening in Gaza, and then of course more recently Lebanon. But all this time, this conflict has been very much alive.
Okay, Professor Greg Barton, always good to get your analysis. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Girish.